All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Funded Innovation Labs workshop. My name's Sarah Maglian. I'm a member of the product team here at Bright Idea, and I've been working with a group of stakeholders to understand and build product for Funded Innovation Labs.
As I said, I'm Jesse Leone. I work on the professional services team here at Bright Idea. I've been doing consulting work for the better part of a decade, helping our client companies establish and develop programs for innovation inside the enterprise. So today what we want to do is we want to talk about what we think is the next biggest opportunity inside of corporate innovation. We call that a funded innovation lab. And in addition, what we'd also like to do is spend a little bit of time talking about tips and tricks. If you're in a position where you can either develop a lab, or if you already have one, we're going to give you some tips and tricks either to establish it or scale it up. All right, so the first thing that I'd like to acknowledge, innovation is a great thing. Everybody here in the room has dedicated themselves to making a positive impact on society. You hear the phrase thrown around, do you live to work or do you work to live? I think everybody here lives for innovation, right? I was actually chatting with the folks from GM last night, and I was sharing a story. My father, when he was 60 years old, he had a heart attack, and he's now 67 years old. But what happened was he went to the hospital, and they put a stent in his heart, right? This is a little, kind of like a little tube that expands the artery. And what I came to realize is that stents were only developed in 1986, which is a year after I was born. So if we were living 30 years ago, my father would not be around today. And I think about this often when I'm in my work. Whether you work in the financial industry or a manufacturing company, in some way, shape, or form, everybody is making positive impact on the world if you work in innovation. And we think this is a fantastic thing. And so it turns out that corporate innovation roles actually have the biggest opportunity to impact society. Does anybody want to take a stab at why this is? Okay, well, so if you look at all the channels for innovation, Kickstarter, Silicon Valley, etc., the spend on innovation is actually dwarfed by corporate innovation. $1.1 trillion a year is spent roughly on corporate R&D. That's trillion with a T. And interestingly, I'll probably refer to General Electric a few times because they're a client that I work closely with. But the Genius Link team that Josh talked about yesterday, I helped them kind of establish their program. I won't take any credit for it because they're great. But the woman, Diane Finkhausen, who runs the Genius Link team, she's pretty much the most effective human being I've ever met in my entire life. Literally, you could talk about Tony Robbins and life coaches and things like this. She's the best. She's the best. And it's interesting to me that she spends her time inside of General Electric to try and have positive impact on the world. I am 100% certain that she can go out and start $1 billion business tomorrow, but she actually chooses to stay at GE because she understands that the resources inside the enterprise allow her to scale her impact even beyond what she could do by herself, right? And so this is really meaningful to me, and I hope that you guys take this to heart. You are at the epicenter of changing the world. And when we look across the innovation landscape, we're actually in the most advantageous position to do this. So many of you have already established corporate innovation programs. A lot of you have done this in the form of shared services. So you have a program for innovation. Likely you're using the Bright Idea tool if you're here today. And you go around to different business stakeholders within the organization and try to solve their problems using various innovation activities, crowdsourcing challenges, etc. There are a lot of things that you can do from here. We're talking about these apps today: strategic innovation, corporate venture funds, accelerators, etc. We actually think the biggest opportunity in corporate innovation right now is what we call funded innovation lab. Okay, and this term innovation lab gets thrown around quite a bit. So let me actually clarify what we mean by this when we use the term Bright Idea. So a lot of people have made what they call an innovation lab, which is a physical space. It's a place where people can collaborate and be creative. That's fantastic. We hope that you all have places like this. I know Kirpal from the IMF is somewhere in the audience, and they've just recently made a physical innovation lab where they're going to do a lot of great work. When we use the term funded innovation lab, however, we're actually talking about a dedicated team inside the enterprise that typically sits above the entire corporation or above a line of business. And this team is tasked with bringing to fruition strategic projects that drive growth in the organization. And they're able to do this because they sit outside of the business units or the lines of business, outside of business as usual, and therefore they're able to take on more risk. They're able to have purview over everything that the company is doing and have kind of more of a strategic intuition about where the company is going. And importantly, again, we use the term funded innovation lab because a lot of innovation teams, again, if you've established shared services, what we do is we pass solutions on to the business, right? A funded innovation lab, however, has a budget to steward projects through to fruition, right? And so whether it come from ideation or if you're doing hackathons and prototyping and so forth, the innovation lab will take these projects and try to bring them through a process that in the abstract looks something like this. So sourcing opportunities for innovation, designing and developing solutions, building a business model around these solutions, and then incubating, which means you're prototyping, you're experimenting, a lot of the things that Eric Rees was talking about yesterday. And so this is not a trivial thing to do. It requires a lot of resources, a lot of skill sets. But let me stop talking about it for 1 second. We actually have a great video. Florida Hospital is a fantastic institution that started a really effective lab inside their organization. So I just want to share this video with you so you can see kind of the impact that these innovation labs are able to have.
Lars Holman gave us all a challenge. He said in Florida Hospital there was no big brain. And what he meant was there's no one person smart enough to run the organization. It takes the collective input of everyone. As we looked around, innovation labs emerged as an opportunity to do that.
How might Florida Hospital Orlando innovate to remain relevant and sustainable in a changing world? To find out, we asked what would happen if we brought together 12 Florida Hospital employees, 6 months of training, 3 site visits, 2 risk-taking executives, and 1 doctoral student. The answer was the Florida Hospital Innovation Lab. Phil has managed to spread to almost every department at Florida Hospital Orlando and all the Central Florida campuses. Over 100 projects have come to Phil, including over 2,000 people and 8 local, national, and international corporations.
This is the place where the hospital started. This wing right here is one of the oldest wings of the hospital. Everything in Phil had to be different. The flooring, the colors, the fabric, the chairs. And I didn't come from healthcare, so I did not know the impact that would have.
The Innovation Lab is really our attempt to tap into the collective genius of the organization.
Phil is a place where anybody in the hospital can come and bring in a challenge or an opportunity.
We came to Phil because we wanted to take a project we were working on with cardiovascular surgeons, and we really wanted to engage them in the project. But it was very exciting to see how engaged they were. They enjoyed the dialogue, they enjoyed the experience. Now we were able to have the physicians side by side with us as we're coming up with the idea.
The people that are using the lab and using it often, when you go and you listen to them talk about how they interact with their staff, you're hearing the things that they're learning in the Innovation Lab. That's how they're tackling problems and addressing them on the fly in their units.
We really want to understand what the challenge is from the user's perspective.
So our challenge was to save $21 million, and we came in with a bunch of preconceived ideas of how that should happen. We started understanding that empathy was very important, but when you actually go gather empathy, there is a whole dimension that you just did not realize existed.
Phil is really what the future looks like. If every school, hospital, workspace could have a place where everybody can come and explore better solutions, I think we would see the world change in ways we never imagined possible.
So you can see the level of impact that these organizations, these innovation labs are having on their companies. You know, Florida Hospital is a small institution, but that'll help you get out of bed every day, right? So what we'd like to do now is actually talk about some of the opportunities that exist within your organization that you can leverage either in an effort to make a funded innovation lab, or if you already have one, to scale it up. I'm going to pass it now over to Sarah, and she's going to start talking about some of these opportunities that we see in front of you.
Great. Thank you. All right, so like Jesse mentioned, we're going to go through and talk about a couple aspects of funded innovation labs, but then also point out the things that you can leverage. So the skills and the knowledge that you've acquired in running your program so far, as well as the Bright Idea Toolkit that can help you take advantage of this opportunity. And the first thing we want to talk about is funding. Your lab is creating new solutions, new products, and you need the funding for that development of those solutions. If you're in the case where you're spinning up your funded innovation lab, one doesn't exist yet, you need to get that initial funding. And one of the things that you can leverage is your ROI portfolio. So if you've been diligent about tracking your quantitative impact to date, and if you have a couple of those successes of challenges that you've run before, you have the numbers to prove your effectiveness in running innovation initiatives within your organization. So you can leverage this ROI portfolio to make a case for that initial funding. And once you get that initial funding, it needs to be sustained, right? So like Jesse mentioned, all of the projects that are coming through your innovation lab go through several stages of development. You have that initial research, you have a deep dive to form a business model, you begin prototyping, perhaps you make a pilot for an MVP. And throughout all these stages, your lab is going to be funding these projects in incrementally larger amounts. And you're going to need the funds to be able to support that. And so yesterday in our product presentation, we showed a couple of new business impact tools that are going to help you record and report all of that impact and keep all of your stakeholders up to date with where the investments are going, how projects are going along, and where the projected revenues of these projects are going to take you. So we touched on a business impact tab at the project level, and then also business impact dashboards at the pipeline level. So I'm going to go walk through both of those. The first one is the business impact tab. So as you can see, we're on the view idea page, and there's a new tab here for business impact, and you have a section for financial information and a section for non-financial information. And so how do you use this in your lab? So when your project teams are developing ideas, they can come to this tab and begin recording, what's the projected revenue of this? What are the projected costs? Like, what materials are we going to need? How much is it going to cost us? And as they develop the idea further, they can adjust these numbers. You can see a whole version to see how that impact is evolving over time. And your lab team can leverage this information in helping make decisions of what's the right bet here? Does this look promising? And then if a project goes through your pipeline, this is also where your lab team can start recording, this is how much we did for first seed funding. This is how much follow-on funding that's happened. And having all of this data in one central location is a great repository of information. And for the projects that make it through your pipeline, you have this great business impact dashboard that helps you report all that information, right? So this top section here is financial benefits over time. This is where you can start showing all the projected revenue that's coming from your projects, set targets for your lab. I know GE has those really high targets, so maybe they can use this target line. And then as those projects go through to maturity, get adopted, if you keep tracking, you can see how your actuals start to measure up against those projections. And you also have this bottom section here that gives you a great summary of like, what are your top contributing projects? How is all of this financial information distributed across the projects in your lab? So I'm gonna pause there. Does anyone have any questions on this so far? Okay, great. So, oh, yeah.
So just a quick clarification, is this the incubate pipeline that we're talking about?
Yeah,
like
so
the one that you were showing before?
That's the product.
Oh, go ahead. No, so this business impact dashboard and the tab that I just showed is actually available across all the pipelines, but for the Funded Innovation Lab, yeah, this is the incubate pipeline right now.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. Oh, so we're hoping, with your diligence in tracking your ROI and then having these tools to be able to capture it and report on it, that you can make the case for that initial funding and then continue to get sustained funding so you can get these projects through your process.
Yep. And if you've been fortunate enough to get funding, or if you already have a lab, one thing that is quite obvious is that making new products and solutions is pretty similar to throwing darts at a dartboard, right? The probability of success is extremely low. Some people go so far as to say less than 15% of products that are taken to market are actually successes. And it's interesting why this is. I think everybody knows about Clay Christensen. He has pioneered, developed, and popularized this theory of disruption. And an interesting thing that I've taken from him is he says, if you were to come into my office, you'd see on the wall a set of books, business theory and innovation theory. And next to these books, you'd see a few empty slots. And that's because we actually don't have all the theories that we need in innovation and in business. And you saw Eric Ries yesterday kind of pioneering the next wave of these theories. But the point is, we don't have all the answers yet. And so the probability of success in your lab is going to be pretty low. And to offset that low probability of success, the Innovation Lab, again, uses this kind of generalized end-to-end process for innovation. So I spoke to it very briefly earlier, sourcing opportunities for innovation, whether that come from the market, your competitors, your corporate strategy, your mission, your brand, et cetera. Picking out those opportunities and developing them, building a business model around them, prototyping and doing experimentation and incubating. And ultimately, these projects are potentially going to be passed back into the business, or you might start a wholly new company, right? You see things like Google X, right? Google doesn't do driverless cars until Google X came around. I know the GM guys are in the room doing similar stuff, but the point is, when a project comes out of Google X, where does it need to go? Sometimes it'll go back into the business. Sometimes it'll drive a wholly new startup. And so for this, we really feel like Ahmad at GM actually just mentioned, you can leverage our Incubate app. So the Incubate app is this end-to-end innovation process. It's meant to imitate all the steps that I just mentioned. So there's a step for discovery, where you're sourcing and ideating around these opportunities. There's a step for research, where you may either be building that business model, or you may be doing things like ethnographic research, or just trying to understand what the opportunity is a little bit more deeply. Prototyping, there's a stage for that, where you can track the results of your prototypes, the costs, how effective it was, or the things that need to be fixed. And then ultimately piloting and experimentation and so forth. And we do this iteratively, right? The lean startup methodology is based off of agile development. So we build and test and experiment, and we build and test and experiment, and so on and so forth. And then ultimately we prepare these things for commercialization. Sarah's going to talk about that a little bit more in just a moment, but that's a quite difficult thing to do, to pass these things off to the business and hand off either to the business or a new startup. So we really feel like the Incubate app is going to help offset this low probability of success, whereby you can track everything transparently through the process. So I'll just pause here. I see a few hands already, so Kirpal, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jesse. So this is quite sort of a contrast from crowdsourcing, where you're going blanket and whatever whoever participates. This is like starting to get into a workshop, a physical space, funding, teams. Am I correct in what I'm saying?
Yeah, so sorry, just to repeat, because it's a little bit hard to hear. The question is, this is a little bit different than crowdsourcing, right, where we're collecting ideas from large groups of the organization. So we're actually going to talk about how these projects get sourced in just a moment, so I don't want to kind of, step on Sarah's toes here, but did you, that was, I think, was setting up your question,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So what else did you have?
So I guess, like what spaces of these, you've got this processes, at which point, do you recommend bringing people together in a room, I'm just trying to sort of understand this process a bit more.
Understood. So, again, Sarah's going to talk about kind of the sourcing of projects in just a minute, but I think if we can perceive that the kind of the Innovation Lab team sits above this process and stewards the projects through, they're actually interjecting themselves at every point in the process. They may not be the people who are working on the projects. So when you find an opportunity, the point is you have funding to now initiate a project team. Right? You may not do that in the early stages when you're doing ideation, but certainly if you're doing researching or prototyping or things that are a little bit more resource intensive, we're actually getting a dedicated team to work on this, right? So does that answer at least part of your question, and then we'll touch on the sourcing of projects? Okay. Other questions? Again, Russ in the back, go ahead.
Hey, so in the top right there, you have the perpetual process. So, I think we can all agree innovation's pretty iterative, right? So what, I guess, tools specific to the platform help facilitate that iteration, right? So let's say you're doing user research, you ask a bunch of customers a bunch of questions, and then, you might want to refine them based on the insights that you find. But it's, I guess, it's linear, but it's in the same step, right? Uh-huh. So how do you guys can help facilitate that in the platform?
Yeah. Okay. So the question is, this process seemingly is pretty linear, right? Step to step to step. But in actuality, again, with agile development and so forth, these concepts, this is really an iterative process. So you may be prototyping things and say, holy cow, we have some bad assumptions here. Let's go back and do some research and so forth. So the question from the gentleman at US Bank was, what tools do we have to be able to effectuate this kind of continuous iteration throughout the process? So we can talk more deeply about this. We can send you some emails if you're really curious. But just off the top of my head, there are going to be stage gates here. So these stage gates are potentially like steps of evaluation where you're vetting things and saying, is this ready to pass forward, right? That's kind of like pre-iteration. In terms of iteration, we use a tool called development. Okay, so development is basically a way to append additional information to these projects that are coming through. And with the development tool, it's something that a whole team can work on. So Sarah might be on my project team, she's logging information. I get in there, I see what she's logging, I say, hey, you know what, here's a new assumption that we need to work off of. And then additionally within development, there's versioning. So you can continue to build versions of this additional information, and then you can also go back in history and reflect on what you've done before, right? So again, there's probably some additional tools off the top of my head. It's a little bit hard to answer. We also have the rules engine, which allows you to build some automation and potentially pop ideas forward and back through the process, but hopefully that answers the question at a high level. Other questions? Yeah. Yes, Guillermo, if you could just wait for the mic, please.
Okay, so, we've been doing some things, as you know, these are for some years now, and what we find is that when you have projects coming in, they come in at different levels of development. So you don't have to go maybe through discovery or research, and you sort of direct entry a project into that life cycle model you got there. So how do you take into account that in the model? How can we filter out or somehow decide where do I start the process?
Okay, so thank you, Guillermo. You've given me a perfect segue to Sarah's next part. So, again, using the process, we're hopefully going to be able to increase the probability of success. The question from Guillermo here was, things are coming into this process at different phases. So if you've done a crowdsourcing challenge or whatever it may be, you don't necessarily know a priori where the projects are coming into this pipeline. So for this, I'm going to kind of pass it over to Sarah, and she's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So once you establish your process for bringing your projects through, the next thing is to actually start working on the projects. And for Funded Innovation Labs, the value here is you're bringing new opportunities to your business. So your products are you're making new product, you're finding new markets, you're branching out into a whole new territory. And I think, I think maybe GE talked about this or Lockheed Martin yesterday. They talked about how some companies face a challenge of when trying to make new products, sometimes it's too tech-centric or too consumer-centric. So you might have an R&D team that's focused on making the latest and greatest technology. They come up with this really cool thing, but there's no market yet to accept it, right? So it kind of just dies. And on the other hand, you might have a team that's doing a lot of great consumer research, understanding problems, talking to customers, but they don't have the technology or a solution that's going to alleviate those needs. And so what a lab does is they get to walk this happy path between tech and product and market demand, right? And you, as innovation program leaders, you're in a unique position to ensure this balance. And part of that is because you've been running your program, you've had a lot of experience with above all the different business units, being able to talk to a lot of different people, executives, and you have a general understanding of where the company's going, where the smoke signals are, where people are waving their hands, and how they want to mobilize innovation around those objectives. And on top of that, you've also been deploying a number of innovation activities, right? And the outputs of these activities are actually a great way or great things that you can feed into your process. So for example, if you ran Understand, you've sparked discussions around consumer needs. What are their pain points? What is the experience like for them? If you've run trend watching, you're up to date with what the latest market trends are, what the latest technologies are. If you've run Optimize, maybe you've been able to identify areas of different business units that are ripe for improvement, ripe for innovation. And then also if you've done a pitch initiative before, there could be some great products out there that have a solid business model that are ready to go, but your company just hasn't had the resources or the time to be able to spark that. And so, yeah, between this and your strategic alignment, you can feed that innovation process with strategic growth projects that are going to drive growth for your company in the right direction.
Yep. And just to add on to that, to the question that Guillermo had, so the outputs of these processes can be input into your incubate pipeline at any stage of the process, right? So you just, you take a hackathon prototype and you change the pipeline into incubate, and it's going to ask you where do you want to put that, right? Okay, so if you've now got projects, the next thing that you really need to consider is that developing these new solutions is a really risky proposition, okay? There's a lot of bananas on the floor for these innovation labs. And that's because, again, developing new products, we don't really understand all the theories that allows us to do this effectively. Furthermore, we're talking about 6 to 12 to 24 to, however many months it takes to bring a product to that point where you can actually scale it up for commercialization. There's a lot that goes on in that period, right? Market changes, competitors change, assumptions change, your risk factors change, right? Cost change, et cetera. And so to deal with this risk, you really, really need cross-functional skill set. And actually, we believe that the people in the room are among the best suited to be able to offset these risks, right? You guys have all the methodologies in RAM already. You know design thinking. You saw Eric Reese yesterday. You know these lean startup processes. You understand all these concepts that are really, really difficult for the lines of business to grasp. But for you as innovators, you should be able to offset a lot of these risks using the knowledge and the skill sets that you have already today. Okay? Furthermore, we've talked about this team workspace. And I know it was touched on just briefly yesterday, and so I'll expand a little bit. You know, the team workspace is a place where your project teams can collaborate together in a transparent way. You know, they're building off of the information from each other. They're asking each other questions and so forth. And from a risk perspective, you saw Genevieve talk about there's actually a place where we can track riskiest assumptions, right? And so by tracking these riskiest assumptions and by mapping them up to portions of your business model, as you go through that incubate process, you're starting to validate or invalidate some of these assumptions that you have about your risks, right? And you can check the box. Okay, we did an experiment and we realized that the market demand for this is pretty high and the price point that people want to pay is, you know, X dollars per unit, right? And so in doing this, using the team workspace, using your existing skill sets, we really feel like you guys can have an opportunity to offset some of these risks that are inherent in bringing new solutions to market. Questions? Yes, Stephanie.
Is the team workspace only available in the Incubate app?
Okay, so the question is this team workspace only available in the Incubate app? So the answer is no. It's actually available across all the apps, including your custom app. So if you decide to design your own process, you'll also get to use this team workspace.
And then is it very similar to the previous project?
Yeah, I would say it's fairly similar. There's a lot of capability. So sorry, the question was, is it similar to a previous project management tool that Bright Idea has been had in the software for a few years now? The answer is yes. It's pretty much an updated design, and it's really geared toward this incubate process, so the abilities that Genevieve shared yesterday to do like business model canvas and so forth, but a lot of the capabilities that you have in projects today are also going to be found in this team workspace.
Okay, cool, awesome.
Other questions? Cool. Yes, right here.
So you talked about the cross-section of these different skill sets.
Yeah.
You know, we've got these design thinkers, we've got these agile guys.
Mm-hmm.
Are those, so in supplement to them, are we going to talk about those other roles that you think are necessary to have a successful lab?
Okay, so the question is, we talked about some of these skill sets. Are we also going to talk about some of the other roles that are kind of necessary to have this lab? I don't think it was intended to kind of have a deep dive at this point in time, but I think in essence, you know, these strategic opportunities that you have are not necessarily going to be homogeneous, right? Products are going to differ, solutions, services. You know, a lot of you guys are working global companies that offer 100 different products. And so as a result, I think some of the skills that we highlighted at the Innovation Lab team level are pretty apt for the roles that you need, right? You'll need potentially somebody to lead the team and really make strategic decisions about which opportunities. A lot of times these lab teams will also kind of meet with executives periodically to try and recalibrate the portfolio of projects, right? So the lab team, I think, is pretty consistent with those skill sets. And importantly, because they have all those skill sets, they can touch every portion of the process. And so while these project teams that are working on different types of projects, you know, not homogeneous projects, right? New technologies, new services, etc. While they may have different skills based on the project, this innovation team can kind of mentor them as needed throughout the process. So if you're working on a new technology and you're prototyping and it's a team of engineers that you so happen to have developed, your design thinking skill set might come in handy, and you may go sit down with those engineers and say, okay, you built a really cool tool, you know, what's the user need here? What's the job to be done, right? So hopefully that answers the question at a high level. We actually do have some of the roles listed out. We have these knowledge base articles that are associated with every app, but for time constraints, we'll just leave it at that. So, Sarah, do you want to take the next part? I'm not sure where we're at on time, so maybe we want to.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So once you successfully de-risk a project, you're finally reaching the end of this process, and you have now a product that's ready to be scaled back to the organization for commercialization. And this handoff is a great indicator of success, right? You're creating new product, it's going to the business, it's scaling, but it's also one of the trickiest parts, and that's for a number of reasons. So sometimes, like Jesse mentioned, you're creating a whole new product that maybe a business unit doesn't exist that's ready to adopt it, in which case, you know, if you have to spin up a new business unit, that takes time and resources and a lot of money. And then in the other case, if there is a business unit that is like fit to be able to accept this project, there are a number of like inherent factors that make it difficult, right? So for one of them, different business units are running at different speeds that might be different from your lab. On top of that, the products that you're bringing in, sometimes it can be disruptive, self-disruptive, right? Cannibalistic of whatever is already existing within that business unit. And that can be a huge change that's people aren't, you know, so willingly open to accept. Business units can be more risk averse. And then also, you know, they have a lot on their plate. So taking in a new product and having the resources and time to be able to scale that up may not be at the top of their priority list. And so what we want to talk about are a couple of tools that will promote transparency along the entire journey from a project, from ideation to something concrete, so that people can stay up to date with what's happening in your lab. And then if they know ahead of time what's coming down the pike, they can be better prepared to accept it for scaling and commercialization. So like Jesse mentioned, we have this great new team workspace feature. This is great for project teams to be able to collaborate, put all their ideas together, focus on the most risky assumption, but it's also great. It's a whole wealth of knowledge all consolidated in one spot that you can share with other people. So like we showed yesterday, you can export this business model canvas. It's, and then you can also share all of your riskiest assumptions and share that with the stakeholders in your company to show all the research that's gone into this. Like, your team has thought through the channels, your team has thought through the cost structure, your team has been able to resolve all these risks. These are the risks that are still outstanding. And they can take all that knowledge and have some concrete evidence of all the work that's gone into it and why this is a solid business model. And on top of that, we also talked about the project gallery. So this is a cool spot for people to just come and see what cool things your lab is doing. You know, what technologies are you doing? What new markets are you trying to break into? But this is also a great way to share what's coming down the pike, right? So people can see, hey, this is an active project that is preparing for launch or is perhaps in a pilot stage that's kind of related to my department. Maybe I can find out more about it. Maybe I can prepare myself to accept this project as it becomes more mature. Yeah, so between these two, being able to share that information, show the hard work that you've put into it, prepare people for things that are going to start coming towards their business units, you can make this handoff a little easier.
So we talked about this fantastic opportunity of an innovation lab and some of the things that you can leverage to either start one or, if you already have one, to scale and sustain your innovation lab. So we talked about tracking business impact and ROI and how that can help you make a case for funding or scale up your funding. We talked about the low probability of success and how having a more formalized process and using the Incubate app can hopefully increase that probability of success. We talked about the strategic growth projects that need to come through your pipeline and how you can leverage some of the other activities and apps to source these projects into your innovation lab. We also talked about the risks that are inherent in these projects and how you can use the transparent features to align the organization with what's going on with these projects and effectively de-risk them. And last but not least, we talked about this really tricky aspect of the handoff and how, again, some of these tools for transparency allows you to make that handoff a little bit easier to the organization. So we hope that you are as excited as we are about developing or scaling your innovation lab, and we hope that you go out there and get going and start one. All right, so we'll leave it at that. We'll take some additional questions before we conclude here.
Hi, just a question about 3 slides before when you were showing the statuses. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Is there any way in which you can actually visualize the stage of the project for the non-admins to be able to see? So in the step process, you can see exactly where the projects are in the different stages. Is there a way you can visualize that for the normal users instead?
Okay, so interestingly, I think you may have noticed there is actually now stages as a filter. So that makes it a little bit more convenient. The question was, is there a way for non-administrators to kind of visualize that stage gate process, right? So we've just introduced the concept of stages in the end user view so people can filter projects by stage. And additionally, we're actually working on a read-only view for the pipeline that is kind of a non-administrator view. So effectively, you can hand this roll-off, this read-only roll-off to other users in the system, and they'd actually be able to see that pipeline view, but not be able to affect any of the projects inside of it. So hopefully that answers the question.
Just a quick follow-up to that one.
Oh, sorry, can you just use the mic?
Just totally related to that, when you said you are creating...
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you just use the microphone?
Where you said that you're creating the stage gate?
Yes.
Where users can see it without being able to move. What's your release time for that or projection?
I don't have an answer for that right now. If any of the product team is in the room and can answer that, please. Okay, great. So we have Genevieve, our VP of product there.
Hey, guys. So there's 2 things that are in the works. One is farther along than the other. One is a custom feature, in fact, that our technical services team actually maybe has been working on, which is based on the back-end UI, a read-only view. And so we can maybe go through your account manager and we can talk more about it for anyone who's interested in that. And then separately, the product team has been looking at, for what you see here, this new and revamped idea boards view, a potential other view of this where instead of these tiles, boards that you see, that there might be a visualization that shows the stage gate process. So that's longer term. I don't have a timeline for that, but it's something we're considering. If you're interested, I invite you to contribute to IdeaSpace and reach out to us so we can learn more from you and develop a better feature around that.
Other questions? Yeah, I think Guillermo was first.
Yeah, no, I was, I think I saw on the first slide or so that this is a perpetual process. I mean, how important is it to have windows of submission of projects instead of having an open window where anybody can submit projects at any time? I mean, does that affect the processing, or what are you thinking about that?
I see. So that's fairly insightful. So the question is, this is a continuous process, and what are Bright Ideas' thoughts on kind of creating windows of time whereby these projects can get submitted? The lab's process is, as you mentioned, kind of ongoing. They never stop kind of sourcing opportunities. But what we said earlier in terms of sourcing these projects can come from your hackathons that you're running, your challenges that you're running, et cetera. So we actually feel like there are windows of opportunity to run targeted challenges, right? If you're working with a product stakeholder or somebody who's in charge of developing solutions for your organization, you may want to run a discussion forum or run a challenge around, what's a new opportunity for this type of customer or something like that, right? So I think you can time box it in that sense when you're doing other activities. The incubate process itself is going to be a continuous one.
So does this idea board replace the current idea board, or?
Right, great question. So Kirpal has asked, does this replace our existing, what we call idea boards, basically the kind of gallery view of ideas? So it's actually a new version of it, but it's not necessarily going to replace it. It will be an option that's found in the setup menu of each of your initiatives, so you can turn it on and off. And depending upon the app that you use, when you create new apps from now on, you may get this by default, but again, you could turn it off if you prefer.
Okay. So second question around that is this at a challenge level, or is this across all your portfolio of, you know, can you see all your ideas across challenges? Or
Okay, so the question is this at a challenge level, or can you see ideas kind of across challenges? So the process conceptually is kind of above any types of initiatives, okay? This can either be a corporate level process, or if you have lines of business, it can be kind of at the top of a line of business. So in that sense, it is abstracted from any of the individual challenges. When I say that you can source projects from challenges, let's say, there's two ways of doing that. So you can copy that idea or project or prototype, depending upon what activity that you're using, and you can pop it into this incubate pipeline. And therefore, there's kind of like two representations, right? And in the incubate pipeline, you may have taken it much further, and you may actually link those things together, or I believe we're coming out with an updated merge functionality pretty soon, right? So, you know, in that sense, it's kind of connected to the challenges, whereby the ideas are coming from them, but it is somewhat abstracted conceptually from any of your challenges, right?
But it's still at a sub-site level.
Right. So if you want to take the architecture at two levels, right? There is this like enterprise level or system level, and then there are your initiatives or activities that you're running. This would be a representation of an initiative, right? Other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to our talk. We hope that you're excited about this. Thank you.